Hey, welcome. The OSBA, Oregon School Board Association OSBA Governance Committee meeting, Friday, March 15th, 2024, is called to order at 11:05 a.m. And let the record show we have committee members present, who are committee member Linda Hamilton, Chrissy Wright, Jackie Crook, Greg Kentz, and Neelam Gupta. Committee member Sonia McKenzie is excused. She has to be excused. And remaining committee members are absent, and hopefully they will join us later on. I want to welcome friends of the committee or members of the public, and also staff who are supporting the committee work. So with that, I want to just start with reminding us of the work of this committee. The governance committee is a committee of the board, and it is responsible of doing important work. And I'm going to just spend a moment to highlight that. If you give me just a second.
Sammy,
Yes, Jack.
I can't see who else. Could you tell us who else is in the room with us,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
please?
Absolutely. So we do have, welcome everybody, and for that request. We do have committee members in attendance. Welcome, Lori Denzuka just joined us. Committee members Neelam Gupta, Greg Kentz, Jackie Crook, Chrissy Wrights, and Linda Hamilton. Committee member Sonia McKenzie is excused. Remainder committee members are absent, and we are supported by staff Lanil Trissel, Neely Nishek, and Bob Steringer, legal counsel, and Haley Purcell. And also, we do have in attendance board member and president-elect Chris Cronin as a member of the public. The meeting is open to everybody who would like to join us as well. They're welcome to attend. Thank you, Jackie, for the question. Do you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the question. So as you know, the governance committee have an important responsibility to support the board with the evaluation of the executive director, and also support the board with the review of the bylaws. Frequently, any recommendations of the bylaws are recommended to the full body of the board. The full body of the board would move those recommendations through the process that we went through last year, where the members vote on bylaws changes. So it is really crucial and important work. It happens in tandem with our experts, the legal counsel, who provide us with an understanding of the compliance of the bylaws with our mission and vision and Oregon and federal laws, but also supporting us to fulfill the mission and vision of the organization in tandem with our policies and the will of the members. So with that, I really want to thank you for serving on this committee. The important work of this committee is a continuous process. And today on the agenda, we do have two items that we are considering for approval as agenda items in the next agenda item, which is approve the agenda. So the chair of the committee entertains a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll move to move the approval of the agenda as presented.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? For the record, we're moving to approve the agenda as presented, executive director evaluation timeline, criteria and process, and bylaws review, both informational discussions. Seeing there is no further discussion, is there any objection to approve the agenda as presented? If you object, please raise your hand, or if you object, please say I object. Seeing there is no objection, the motion passes without objection. Next item on the agenda is executive director evaluation timeline, criteria, and process for informational discussion. Haley, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to have Linnell share screen in just a moment, but I wanted to just make sure that my proposal of how to proceed with this particular agenda item is okay with you. My plan was to kind of go through the executive director process that I've outlined in the packet. And then after I've outlined that, have some discussion about the process and answer questions, but not take questions as I kind of go through it, but wait to the end to do that. Is that okay with you? Okay. All right, Linnell, if you could share screen so we can look at this document together. First of all, this is my first time going through this process. I know many of you have already been through it before, so but this is new to me. So I had Linnell help me find the previous executive director evaluation process that the board used, and I just updated it a little bit to meet our current needs. As I was reviewing this process, it appears that the board every year adopts a process for the executive director evaluation. One thing that I would like to recommend for the future is maybe some sort of permanent process that the board adopts so that the board doesn't need to redo this every single year. It looks like it's pretty much been the same process every year with some minor changes. So if, you know, in the future, we could think about maybe establishing something more permanent so that the governance committee doesn't need to do this every single year. But I've gone through this document and changed executive director to acting executive director because currently we have an acting executive director. I've tried to change the dates in the document. And so you'll see the red lines. And so the red lines indicate changes that I'm proposing to the process, and the non-red lined language is just taken from last year's process that was adopted for Jim. So I'll just kind of go through this timeline a little bit. And before I get through this timeline, you're probably going to remember that I've been repeatedly saying that we need to evaluate the executive director by June of this year. As I started to look at creating a process, it became clear to me that I don't believe that is possible for us to go through some sort of evaluation process with the acting executive director before the end of June in a manner that would be fair to her. This process takes a lot of steps, including adopting goals. So the executive director has to adopt goals, which has not happened yet because the board has not asked her to do so. And this process here that we're looking at has to be adopted by the full board. So our next meeting is in April. We already have an agenda planned for April for some facilitated work with Salam. I don't think that it is wise at this time to interrupt that process, because the plan at that April meeting is to kind of focus the board on what goals you want to focus on, and Emily being part of that conversation of what her goals look like. So hopefully at the April meeting, Emily kind of comes out of that April meeting with an idea of what the board would like her goals to be. So then she can develop those before the June meeting. Trying to expedite that timeline, I just don't think, you know, we have the time to set up the variety of board meetings it would take to kind of put a process in place that would be fair to her before June. And I've talked to her about that, and she is okay with waiving that requirement in her contract if the board chooses to do that. So that's one of the things we'll have to discuss after I kind of go through what I'm proposing here, is whether the governance committee wants to make that recommendation to the full board that we waive that evaluation process for this current year and just adopt this process that I brought before you. So assuming that we waive the current requirement in the contract, at the June meeting, we would present this document to the full board, and the board would adopt this at the June meeting. Emily would present her goals to the full board at that same meeting, and those goals would align with the board's strategic plan. And then because we wouldn't be doing an evaluation before June of this year, I know that some board members might feel like we need some sort of check-in. So I added an additional September check-in on the executive director's progress towards her goals. So that's not something that's been done in the past. That's a new kind of check-in where she would outline her progress that has been made since the June meeting. And that might be something that the board considers adding as a permanent feature of this, because when I look at from June to January, that's a really long time period with no update on the executive director's goals. So that was a suggestion that I added in here. January, just kind of some language to make it clear that the executive director is giving a mid-year status report on their 24-25 goals. Mid-May, again, another update from the executive director. This is not new. This is what has been done in the past with the executive director, but just making it clear that the director is giving an update on their goals. Then in May, this is again something that the board has done for several years now. The president prepares and sends a survey to the board to give input on the acting executive director's performance. Then the president, prior to the June meeting, compiles all of those results from the survey into an evaluation document. And then the executive committee develops a recommendation about the acting executive director's employment contract. And this has just been the practice for several years now. At the June meeting, I've proposed some changes. So in executive session, the president presents the evaluation report to the acting executive director and the board for discussion and consensus. So in the past, the board has met in executive session and without the acting executive director present. I don't know about all of you, but anytime I've been evaluated by my supervisor, I do that with the person that's evaluating me. That doesn't happen without me being present. So it seems like a more fair process to have the acting executive director involved in that discussion. That discussion happens in executive session, and then the board decides if whatever that document is that was presented by the president, if it's good as is, or if there are changes that need to be made. And if so, then the board comes back out into open session. The president presents recommendations on the acting executive director's employment contract. The board authorizes the president to sign a new contract or compensation addendum if applicable. I know in the past, the board has entered into a new contract, I think, with the executive director every year. That's not necessarily required. You know, in the past, the board has entered into 3-year contracts with the executive director and then reissued new 3-year contracts every year. That's not required. So the board may or may not decide to issue a new contract. And I've added in language that if there are going to be some kind of substantial changes to the executive director's employment contract, that contract be reviewed by OSBA's outside legal counsel before the president and the executive director sign that document. Also, so following the executive session at the June meeting, the board would come, Linnell, can you go back up? I'm not quite done with that one. The other thing that the board would do is authorize the president to update the evaluation document based on feedback from the board that the president received in executive session. Maybe there are no changes. Maybe the board meets in executive session and the document is good as is. Then the board would just authorize the president to sign the document on behalf of the board. If there are some changes that need to be made, the board would authorize the president to make those changes and sign the evaluation document and finalize that evaluation process. And you can scroll down now, Linnell, thank you. So then by the end of June, the president would make any kind of changes that the board directed the president to make, sign the evaluation on behalf of the board. The acting executive director would sign the evaluation, and then OSBA staff would place that document into the executive director's personnel file. And all of this would be wrapped up by the end of June. So this is a little different than how it was done in the past. In the past, the president would actually meet one-on-one with the executive director in August and sign the document, which does not comply with the executive director contract. That contract says the evaluation needs to be done by the end of June. So if we want that contract language to continue in the executive director's contract, then we need to complete this process by the end of June, have the document signed, put in the personnel file by the end of June, wrap that whole process up by the end of June. Now, if we want to extend that process into August like we have in the past, then I would suggest that we make changes to the executive director's contract. But June seems like a great time to wrap it up since that's when our fiscal year ends. So that's why I would suggest trying to resolve all of this. In the past, like I said, the president would meet one-on-one with the executive director. I'm not a huge fan of that. I would prefer for the whole board, since the whole board is the one evaluating the executive director, that the whole board just have that discussion with the executive director in the June meeting, like I suggested, rather than having one board member meet with the executive director to go over the final evaluation document. So that's why I'm suggesting that. And then the last item here, if the contract, the executive director is going to be receiving a new contract, or if changes are going to be made to the contract, I have that will be completed by the end of August, just to give time for legal counsel to review any changes. I don't think it's realistic for us to be able to get that all done by the end of June. So I gave a little bit of wiggle room there so that we could have time to get that to legal counsel to review. So that is the process I am proposing. And I'm happy to hear feedback, answer questions about that proposal. And Linnell, you can stop sharing screen for the
Thank you,
moment.
Haley. And folks, you have the document in your agenda packet. Just to streamline the discussion, I would like to maybe let's do questions, clarifying questions, and then we go for feedback and comments. So any questions or clarifying questions? Greg.
Yes, last night we had our regular board meeting and our local board, and we had the same thing. We just did our evaluation for our superintendent and included a change to the way that we do our update for their contract. And I saw on this new portion that you wrote in there that that we would authorize the president to sign a new contract or compensation addendum if applicable. But it doesn't say in there how long the terms are or anything in this document. But we had a question because we have traditionally done a 3-year rolling contract so that it gets adopted each year, but for 3 years. And so it would always be just 1 year ahead all the time. And we could not find in our language where the 3-year contract, we didn't see any language in there that said rolling or what the 3 years meant. And so we interpreted it as 3 years from the time the contract ended. So our contract with our superintendent ends in 2026. So we extended it for 3 years, which makes it the ending at 2029. And so my question, I guess, is what I think that we have been doing for many years is that 3-year rolling contract, which we renew each year. So it just continues on. And is that what we're intending here?
So the board obviously has that flexibility, and that's why basically the board would decide how long the contract is with the executive director. In the past, you're correct, it's been 3 years, and every year you give a new 3-year contract. Our board is different than a school board. You're not required by law to have a 3-year contract with our executive director. So if you chose, you don't have to do that every year, but you could. And I think the process I've set up allows you to do whichever option. If you want to give a new 3-year contract every year, you can continue to do that. If you don't, then you don't have to.
We also added an addendum on there saying that we would open the contract at the termination of the regular contract. We would open it for new addition for compensation and benefits. So we did that with our action last night.
Okay.
Thanks, Greg. Other questions? I have a question. So with that's I wanted to clarify, not necessarily putting an opinion here. At June 2025 meeting section, there's a wording that says the board authorizes the president to sign a new contract or compensation addendum if applicable. The way I read this is this policy now giving the president the capacity to, or the authorization already to sign a new contract and any compensation changes. And if there's any changes that just go through legal counsel and then the board president is authorized to make any changes? Or are we saying the board shall authorize the president, so any changes for the contract or renewing the contract as is, the president needs to get a formal vote by the board to say, yes, let's go for those conditions. Which one is it?
Yeah, so the board would decide on what changes need to be made and then authorize the president to make those changes. So the president would not be doing that on their own. They would be
Correct.
following whatever the board decides. So the board decides we want to do X, Y, and Z. They say in open session, we want to change the contract to say X, Y, and Z. We authorize the president to go make those changes, get it reviewed by legal counsel, and sign the document. But the president can't act outside of the board's authorization. So if we need to fix that language so that it's more clear, I'm
Yes, please.
happy to work on that.
Yeah, I would say probably something like the board should authorize the president, and then at the end, should be reviewed by OSB outside legal counsel and presented to the board for approval. So just to make it very clear, no one will misread it. That's the president is authorized by this language to move forward with those substantive changes, if that makes
Agreed.
sense. Cool, thanks. So next up is Neelam and then Linda. Neelam?
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for this work, and this looks like a really great process. I just had a clarifying question around the criteria, because in the second paragraph, it references adopted criteria, but at the bottom, the criteria is struck. So maybe criteria, where the criteria, maybe it just sits in a different place in the document, and just making sure that that's clear.
Yes, so it's used to say criteria, and I got rid of that so that it was clearer in the body of this document that the performance evaluation is based on the executive director's goals that are in alignment with the board's strategic plan. So if there is a criteria word in here still, my intention was to strike all reference to criteria so that it's clear that this is based on the executive director's goals that are in alignment with the board's strategic plan.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Linda?
Thank you. Sorry, I got an answer from the last question. Thanks.
Great minds think alike. Any other questions?
I just
So-
have one more thought. I appreciate the fact that our acting director, executive director, has waived this evaluation. And my only concern would be that we are, and I understand that we probably are, but we just need to make sure that we are legal with all the requirements of our organization. That is possible, that we can waive that, and we're under no obligation to hurry up and complete it. Just want to make sure that we're all above board and legal with that, with our organization.
And I think, Haley, the answer is that's a mutual agreement between both parties, probably in writing, would fulfill that.
Yes, I would want something from Emily in writing, and then at the June meeting, the board will have to, I would think, formally waive that in a motion that we would have to create for you, so that there's a written record of both sides agreeing to that.
Beautiful. Thanks, Greg. Bob, any disagreements there? Awesome. Linda?
Could I get some clarification on the waive again? It was waiving the June waiving. Give me some clarification, Haley, again on that. I got some notes, but I'm not clear. I didn't write down clear. It was waive. What are we waiving? We're waiving the evaluation to be done by June. Is that correct?
Correct. So Emily's current contract says that she needs to be evaluated by the end of June of this year. And so we would be waiving that evaluation. She has agreed to it. And if the board agrees to it, we would waive that evaluation by June of this year.
And so
this
she really,
process- would start in June of this year, and she'd be evaluated in June 2025.
Oh, yeah, I have some concerns about that. We've never done that before, and it's already been 6 months. It is a short evaluation. So she's going to bring us some goals, I know, but I really have some concern waiving the evaluation to June. And really, you're doing an evaluation between June 24 and June 25. So that's another whole year. We renew that contract. We have to go up to June of 2025. And I guess my concern is, in the meeting the other night, we have evaluation to do on, not, I don't know how it's going to play out according to the attorneys. We got Jim's evaluation due in June and her evaluation due in June. So I'm getting a little confused here. But yet we want to waive hers till another year, maybe?
So the reason I'm proposing that we waive it this year is because I don't believe there's a sufficient time between now and June to set up a process that would be fair for an individual that's been with our association less than a year and was thrown into this position. She hasn't had, the board has not directed her to adopt any sort of goals, and there's been no work yet between the board and Emily to establish those goals. So I think the plan is to do that, kind of start that work at the April board meeting that's coming up. And so there isn't sufficient time for her to come up with her goals, and then the board do an evaluation of those goals in such a short time period. And so that's why I added in the September update from her, so that the board isn't waiting until next January to receive the first update. She would update the board in September on her progress of her goals. So it's not a formal evaluation in September, but it's an opportunity for her to explain to the board, I adopted these goals in June. I've been working on them for several months, and here's my update in September. So that's kind of why I added that in, to give the board some feedback, some process there, so they're not waiting. So you're not all waiting till June or January to get an update.
Okay, so we're currently not acting on operating as an interim executive director. We're not currently operating under the current goals we had set from Jim's evaluation. We are not operating under those. Okay.
No, because that process applies specifically to Jim, and Jim developed his own goals with the board. And so, yeah, that's a completely separate process that was adopted for Jim. So we need to adopt a separate process for Emily.
Okay.
Good question, Linda. Thank you. Chrissy?
So I understand exactly what you're saying. I do think that there does need to be an opportunity for the board to also then give Emily feedback before an entire year and some from now. That's a really long time to not have a conversation about goals. So I appreciate having, at least in September, some opportunity to have a check-in, an evaluation of some sort, so that we can, say to everybody else that, no, we're all in line, or we're not in line. So I do appreciate that September meeting, and I think it's really an important part of this, having Emily as our interim. So thank you.
Acting. Thank you, Chrissy. Emily Nishik.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Haley, one thing, I know we looked at this and I didn't catch it then, but I'm wondering if, for the dates purposes for the check-ins on the goals, if we just added in that it's the acting executive director or executive director eventually just provides an update to the board at every regularly scheduled board meeting on where they are in relation to their goals, that's just part of the ED's update, similar to what I did for the last one. So that we're not trying to align, because one I saw in there was in May, but we don't really have a meeting during May typically. So if that just kind of streamlined it for everyone, and it just became an expectation that that's part of checking in quarterly on the goals.
Yeah, I personally like that too. Is there any objection to that from the team, from the committee? See none. Haley, Emily, let's go with it. I like that. And regular meetings, so if we end up with an emergency meeting, you don't need to work on developing an update while you need to address whatever uh a boiler funding or whatever we need to work on. Okay, cool. Any other questions? I think with the questions we have a good consensus, but let's open it up for any feedback. Any feedback on with all the comments that have been already made. I believe there's consensus, no objections to the comments. I didn't hear disagreement. Is there any further feedback on what we have? Seeing there's no further feedback from what we have, Haley, next steps. You'll incorporate the updates and then
Well, it's up to you guys whether you want to see this document again as a governance committee, or you feel comfortable with me making the edits we discussed and presenting this to the board at the June meeting. I could email it out, make the updates, email it out to you all. You could let me know, not reply all, but just call me or email me if you saw something in there and if I got feedback from people that made it feel like we needed to bring it back to the governance committee, then I could bring it back.
Jackie.
My question is, we have the evaluation, what's our schedule on compensation talking about in this process?
Thank you, Jackie. I think I can answer that unless someone wants to jump in. So the answer to that is currently we have an ongoing contract with the acting executive director. We do have an executive director on paid leave as it stands right now. And until the executive director on paid leave status changes, the ongoing compensation for the acting executive director continues. After that process changes, after that status changes where the existing executive director on paid leave status changes, then the board may enter into a discussion on next steps. Am I capturing that accurately? Is there anything else, Haley, Emily, or Bob, you want to address or say?
So in the process that I outline here, there's an opportunity at this June meeting for the board to decide whether or not they want to make any changes to any of the executive director contracts they want to make decisions on. There's no requirement that the compensation change this June, but that opportunity does exist for the board to talk about that at the June meeting.
June 2024.
Yes.
Perfect. So based on the feedback, a board member or the board may say, we need to discuss that, and then we'll enter a discussion and go from there.
Yes, now that I'm reading this, now I do not have that at the June 2024 in this process. I could add that. It's, I could add that if that's what is the will.
So Jackie, you asked a question, is that the will of the member? And then I'll check in with the rest of the committee. And you are still muted.
I just think that we have to have some kind of conversation about this. And the other, yeah. And so as long as we have an acting, we need to have some way to look at compensation and a time for it.
Thank you. So thank you for the input. I want to check with the rest of the committee on the input. So there is a discussion now with the process, whether in the June meeting we'll be getting an update, or we'll be getting an update and a discussion on compensation. Is there any feedback on this point specifically? Or honestly, I want to ask you on your opinion or direction, so we have a consensus one way or the other. Linda?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, that was my concern of going like the whole year between June and June 2025. They're due. I feel like we didn't have that when we enter into the contract. We had the information about us on Zoom, and the compensation package was there and already done. We really need to have conversation on what to the compensation package continue to go forward, which will come up at it's usually before we approve the contract. But yes, I agree, there needs to be some discussion on the compensation package.
Thank you, Linda. Just as a reminder, the board did approve or discuss the package and the contract and did vote on the acting executive director compensation when we entered to the contract earlier. But point noted, members of the
N-
committee, sorry, go ahead, Linda.
I didn't say we didn't have much discussion around it. When we got the package, it was basically there and the information was there, and we were voting all of a sudden. It was coming for vote in the agenda in the packet. I don't remember any whole discussion other than the night of the meeting where the information was there and we could discuss it. It was sort of, I might have missed something.
Yeah, thank you. So honestly, and if I may address, then I'll defer to other committee members if they want to discuss this. This is a very good question. If you want to change how we approach it, usually, and I want to lean on Bob, maybe he's done some contract negotiations in the past as well. Usually you have a proposal by one entity, either the board or the employee, and you would present that to the other party, and you either get a yes or you get feedback on points of negotiation or parameters of negotiation. The way I recall it, and Greg, I remember, had a really strong opinion on it, and we had a really good discussion on it. And eventually we entered into a vote based on a proposal and based on a decision and a vote of the board. Nevertheless, I want to also reflect on important points that we heard from Emily and other board members in terms of the need to create stability for the organization when we voted at the time. So that discussion could repeat again in June. What are the parameters of deciding on the compensation? Another element that we discussed as well, and Emily brought up, is a recommendation for the board to really think seriously about the field statewide and nationwide, and do a salary study basically. So that's another point of consideration for the board before that I would strongly recommend before we enter into any changes into compensation or discussion on compensation, is to have a good situational awareness on what's the salary study look like. And if we have not done the salary study for a while, we might be in making the discussion without a really informed opinion. So that was something that really justified the decision, to my understanding, where we were. So I'm just trying to narrate my personal reflection on the discussion when we voted on the first compensation. My recommendation for June personally here, and I want to leave it to the committee to give a direction. Here's the field and here's the market. Washington already have their executive director deciding to take another role nationwide. They're our neighbors, Washington States Association, and they're going through this process. Our need for stability is so important, and also our need to have a very good understanding of salary schedule is going to be crucial. So my recommendation is, if I was an employee, I want to have a good stability forecast and give signal to I get signal from the board that we want to ensure that. So as we discuss this, I encourage us to really think about that in terms of how we want to approach June. And if we want to have a discussion, let's have a discussion on parameters, just like how we had it in when we voted recently. So with that, Linda, thank you. Points well taken. And I'm gonna call you with your names. Greg, Lori, Neelam, Chrissy, Jackie, what's your direction on this matter? Should we have a discussion on compensation in June? And how should that look like in this process?
Um, what I'm, first of all, how long is the contract? When is Emily's contract up? And I apologize for not, paying attention to this.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to know. And I just think that we don't want to go from January to the June of 25. I think that we need to understand. Eventually, we are going to have a go from an acting to an official, director. So I don't know. I just think that first of all, we need to know when the contract's up and when we actually need to have this conversation. I guess that's a really important
Yeah. So to answer the question, and I'm gonna lean on a part of the answer that I can't remember correctly, but to the answer the first part is there's no expiration date on it, and also the conversation is likely to change based on the status of the current executive director on paid administrative leave. And as you may recollect, as members of the board within different contexts, not to be discussed at this moment, is that we don't know exactly, or we don't have a confirmation exactly when that will be. What's the timeline? So until that timeline triggers the conversation, we may discuss with the acting executive director to change it. And here's what I don't remember. I think it is at will where the acting executive director revert back to deputy executive director immediately with effective immediately by decision of the board whenever that is necessary. Is that correct?
That's what I'm recalling too. I don't know, Emily, if you remember more clearly, but I think there's a provision in there that says if you choose somebody else, she goes back to her deputy position.
Yeah, the dates of the contract, because it was acting and all happening very fast, and we didn't know how long this was going to last. It was effective November 13th and can be terminated by either party at either time. And then I would automatically go back to the deputy role with any pay increases that could have happened while I was in that role. I would be added to my compensation, I guess. And I think that's it. I think that answers your question.
Thanks, Emily. Neelam.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I know we spoke about this before, but I think it's so, and I just want to kind of re-emphasize the point that you made, Sammy, that stability is so important for our director role going into 2025 legislative session. Just the having that reputational integrity, there's already been damage done, and just making sure that we have a strong front is just so critical.
Thank you, Neelam. Chrissy?
So I just want to understand the timeline a little bit more, and I apologize that I don't know it better. But so basically, things moved very fast when Jim took a leave of absence. Emily came in as our deputy director to be our acting director. And so we really are, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we're kind of waiting to make any move on a permanent director until we sort of figure out what's going on with Jim. Now, at that time, then the board will decide on a timeline for doing an executive director search. And so, whatever that looks like, it could technically be before next, the next 25 session, although that would seem like a fast movement. But just so I'm correct, that we're not just sort of, putting, and again, there's nothing but gratitude for Emily's coming into this role because it was such a chaotic time. But I just want to make sure that we're, looking at making sure that we have the director in place that we need for the long term and not just looking at like, the stability of, although I know how important stability is as well, but just making sure that's kind of the fact that we don't know what's going on with Jim is really the factor here and when we can decide how that process works. Is that
Your summary is correct. Haley, anything to add or correct?
Nope, that's correct.
You got 100%. So based on that, I don't want to call on you, but we're in a situation where we need to have direction on June. Do you have a direction? Should we leave it as is, or should we add compensation discussion? And if we do, how would that look like? And the question is for all of you. Right now, I heard from Linda. Neelam, I heard perspective, and Chrissy, I heard clarification. Jackie, I heard clarification. Give us direction. What's the will of the committee?
I'm not, I'm not sure we're ready to make a recommendation. I think we need to thoughtfully go through this. I'm just saying that if, I don't see us going for, an executive director search anytime soon. And
Mhm.
so, and keeping Emily, in limbo, is not necessarily very fair. So I think that, her status and of course we have to wait for Jim, and that's another topic. And, so I was just wondering, about if she's going to be here for a year and a half and, or 2 years or whatever. And, and then how are we going to handle, compensation for her? And so, but I'm not ready to make a decision at this juncture. I think it's a topic for another time,
Thank
but
you.
we just don't want to forget it. We just
think Jackie's streaming became frozen. So sorry, Jackie, if I'm talking over you, but you're frozen to me. Or am I frozen to everybody? Okay. So Jackie, I think we got the gist of most of what you said, but you were frozen for the last few seconds. Thank you. And based on that, I would recommend for the committee that we put a pin on this. Haley comes back with a modified language for review. And in a later meeting, we may discuss if there is any conversation around compensation. And if it is appropriate, if the committee authorized me, I can have a discussion also from Emily to see Emily's recommendations on that part as well, because frankly, in my own personal employment, I would like to have a conversation about my compensation every year so I can get my 5 or 6% COLA. Well, I don't. So if that's okay, I can have a conversation with Emily and present a recommendation for your consideration, whether we leave it as is, as a preference, or if we should have a language there, and how would that look like? Is that something you're all comfortable with? And we'll come with that in tandem with a modified language that Haley will present, and probably will need to meet sometime between now and June. Sounds good? All right, now we'll zoom out. Any other feedback on the full review process or evaluation process? See none. We're 6 minutes ahead of schedule. Oh, how does this committee meet? I got a question. So we do meet frequently, I think, based on a call by the committee per chair. We don't have a pre-scheduled meetings. Is that correct, Haley?
There are no pre-scheduled meetings. This is just the first one of the year.
Yeah. So definitely thank you for volunteering or sorry for the extra commitment. We will be meeting more frequently. It is the matter of this board. We're going to be meeting more frequently as committees. Lots of good work happening this year. Transformation to the positive direction for sure, and that will require probably another meeting before June and potentially another meeting between June and September if there's any further recommendations. It's going to be dependent on what staff drives and how we have consensus on recommendations to move forward. So with that note, I want to move to the next agenda item, which is, unless there is any other comments on evaluation. So no further comments on evaluation. Next agenda item is 2024 bylaws amendments. So as a reminder, bylaws amendments are confirmed by the general membership of OSBA through election process that they vote on. Whenever the board of directors submits a recommendation of amendments for the bylaws. The most review of the bylaws happened very recently last year when we had some changes, including the introduction of the rural caucus. Those recommendations to the board from the board come from this committee. And this is the very first step to review the bylaws. And Haley submitted some recommendations for us to consider. There are some points that we may need to add some time to consider further. But right now, we'll consider them as a high level, get direction from the committee if there's any specific issues that we need to address beyond what you have, and also if you have any feedback on what you're going to have here. So I hope you got time to review those bylaws recommendations. And with that, I'll give Haley the opportunity maybe to present them and to go over them and maybe to share the intention behind them.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, my plan was to go through the memo that I supplied along with the redlined bylaws and just explain some of these changes that we're proposing. If you had an opportunity to read through that memo, you'll see that most of these changes are not, we don't consider them substantive. They're not changing the way things work or operate. It's just improving readability. If you've ever taken the time to read through the bylaws, sometimes they're difficult to read in sections and follow. And so we've done what we can to try to make things clearer in there to answer kind of frequently asked questions that we've been receiving about the bylaws. So mainly not substantive. The other thing I wanted to point out before we start going through these is that this document uses the word member, and that refers to OSBA members of OSBA. So the school districts that belong to OSBA are the members. And then it refers to directors, and those are the OSBA board directors. Sometimes we call them board members, and so that gets confusing in the language in this document. So you really have to pay attention to whether it says member or directors. When it's saying member, that means OSBA members. All right, Linnell, do you want to move to 2.1.1? That was, and you'll see, I'm not going through every single, there were some commas added in places and that sort of thing. I don't think there should be any questions about those, but if there are, let me know at the end. And we can go over those. I tried to just highlight in the memo the things that I thought board members might have questions about. So 2.1.1, we deleted the word local because in ORS chapter 332, it refers to school districts. It does not have the word local. So it's just to align the language with the statute. And you'll see at the end of my memo here that I put the statutes in this document so that if you want to see the actual language of the statute, you can go and look at that. So that change is just to align with the statute that's cited there. The next change is 2.10, 2.10. Okay, so this section 2 is about meetings of the members. And so we're just adding in language here to specify that this provision applies to meetings of the membership. And then we created a second, which we'll get to later and I'll talk about again. We added in section 3, exact same language that applies to the OSBA board meetings. So this language here in 2.10 refers to meetings of the members, and we've added a provision in section 3 that applies to OSBA board meetings so that it's clear that we can have meetings by telephone and video in accordance with ORS 192-670. And again, I have that statute laid out at the end of the memo as well, if you want to see that. But no substantive changes, just making it clear that the members and the OSBA board can have telephonic and video meetings, which we've been doing. So I just want to make sure that's clear in this document. The next change that we highlighted was in 3.5. So if you could go to that one. And the other piece I wanted to mention as we get to this section that's a little bit confusing. We have not had Bob review our suggested changes yet, and I propose that we have him do this just to confirm that we aren't changing things that are substantively, because some of these provisions in the bylaws are very confusing and we want to make sure that we're not doing anything substantive here. In this particular section, we are proposing that we change this to 22 regionally elected directors, because when you count how many regionally elected directors are listed, there are 22, not 23. And so what we believe may have happened, because this number changed in December, this past December, it went from 22 to 23. So we think that what happened is when the rural caucus got added, we added a number, raising this from 22 to 23 by adding that rural caucus into that number, but that's a separate board member. So that is not one of the regionally elected. So we have 22 regionally elected. We have one board member from the color caucus and one member from the rural caucus. So just the way it was written, I don't believe we need to change that number to 23. But this is one of the questions we're going to have for Bob to kind of sort through and make sure we're correct on our addition and how this is laid out. And again, if you have questions, please reserve them to the end and then we can talk through them, because there are a lot of things that we're suggesting here. So moving to 3.5.2a. So this language just moved to A from B, because when we were reading through this, it just made more sense for this language to be in A rather than B. We weren't changing any substantive language, just moving language from B to A. So that's the only change there. 3.5.4 is the next one. And this is a larger conversation, a conversation about ex officio board members. I know there's been lots of questions about ex officio board members over the past year. There are lots of questions that we have about how many ex officios we have, whether the board wants to continue having this many from a cost perspective. A lot of the people that are listed here do not actually show up to the OSBA board meetings. So deciding what we do if they don't show up. Do we want to continue having this many ex officios? Questions of that nature. And then of course the question about, do we want ex officios to be able to serve in officer positions? So lots of questions kind of around this. So one of our questions for you is this a conversation we want to have at another governance committee meeting? And I would suspect that if we are going to have a conversation about ex officios, that would just be a meeting all of itself, perhaps, where that's the only topic being discussed. I think this could be a large conversation, because I think I've heard lots of different questions from lots of different people about this section. So that's just a note. The changes that we made here, changing the Coalition of School Administrators to the name that it currently is. It used to be Confederation, but they changed their name. And then for the Oregon Association of Education Service Districts, it's their chair-elect that serves ex officio on our board. So just changing that language. So we haven't proposed any substantive changes here. If there are going to be substantive changes, we recommend that we have a meeting or discussion at a future board or governance committee meeting to discuss that. Let's see, 3.6. Okay, so this, we are suggesting that we add that all appointed interim directors must run for election during the next election cycle following appointment. Because earlier in section 3.6, it says the director is appointed to serve until December 31st. So if that person wants to continue in that position, they're going to have to run for election because their appointment will expire. So that was just added to make that clear. We don't see that as a substantive change. 3.9. So we're proposing that we have separate sections for regular meetings and special meetings, just to make sure that those requirements are clear. So create paragraph for regular meetings that is separate from special meetings, since there are different requirements for the two meeting types. We're not suggesting any sort of substantive changes here, just making it clear that there are different requirements for these two different types of meetings that the OSBA board could have. This new language in 3.10 is what I discussed earlier that came from section 2, meetings of the members. We just brought that down here so that it was clear. 3.11, create a new paragraph titled Place of Meetings to make sure that it's clear that you know, the OSBA board meets within the state of Oregon, which is required by law. 3.12, create a new paragraph titled Telephonic Video Meetings that matches section 210, meetings of the membership, and complies with ORS 192.670. So that was from taken from the member language up above in section 2, just to make it clear that the OSBA board can have telephonic and video meetings as is allowed by law, and we have been doing, so just making sure that that's clear here in the bylaws. 3.13, this is an example of how the members and directors language is confusing in here. We believe that this was a typo and that it was intended to say all directors shall be officially notified of a special meeting by written notice delivered personally by telephone or electronic mail to all directors. So that's why we think it was intended to say all directors, because it says we're going to give the direction to directors there later in the sentence there. And so I don't think the intention was members. We're in section 3, which applies to OSBA meetings, not meetings of the members. So I think that was just a typo due to the confusion around those two words that I noted before. 3.19 is the next one. This might be a more substantive conversation as well that we might reserve for a future meeting. It's not required that we make this change, but as we were processing through this conflict of interest policy at the onboarding meeting, and I've had some directors submit conflict forms to OSBA. I had a question which I reached out to legal counsel about and determined that there isn't a legal requirement that directors submit these conflict of interest forms to OSBA staff. And it feels a little bit misleading to do that process, because it implies that OSBA staff will be monitoring these conflicts or doing something with these conflict forms. And really it is on the directors themselves to state if they have a conflict in the public meeting. So if they have a potential or an actual conflict, the law requires that that be declared at a meeting. And staff are really not in a place to track those for board directors. That is the director's responsibility to track their own potential and actual conflicts and declare those at a meeting. So filling out a form and giving it to OSBA staff isn't really doing anything substantive. So I'm suggesting that we eliminate that requirement going forward. This provision also requires OSBA staff to notify all of the members of the conflict of interest policy, which I suppose is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I wonder why we're doing that. And if we are going to notify members of the conflict of interest policy, I would suggest maybe we look at what other policies we might be reminding the members of, like the anti-discrimination policy or something like that. It just seems odd that the only policy we would update the members on annually is the conflict of interest policy. So I would suggest either we stop having that requirement, which I'm not even sure has been done, or if we're going to continue with the requirement of notifying the members of the conflict of interest policy, we talk about what other policies we want to notify the members of annually. So that is that issue. Again, we might have to have a further conversation at another meeting. 4.1.1 and 4.1.2, clarifying that the president as chair and as ex officio voting member pursuant to section 5.5.1 of the bylaws. Just adding in that the executive, all of the committees, the president serves as an ex officio voting member on all of the committees pursuant to 5.5.1 of the bylaws. So adding that language into the committee language here in the bylaws, so that if somebody's reading it, it's clear that the president is an ex officio voting member on those committees and doesn't have to go read 5.5.1 to learn that. It makes it clearer here in these actual committee language here. So that's why we're proposing adding that in. It is not a substantive change. The president has been ex officio voting member on these committees pursuant to 5.5.1 previously. That's not something we've added in. 4.1.3b is a new provision, and this was just an attempt with B, C, D, and E to add some paragraphs and breaks into this section, because it was really difficult to read and to figure out the different requirements here. So we're not proposing any substantive changes, just putting these into paragraphs with titles that make sense, so that, you know, if somebody has a question about composition, we can go to the composition paragraph, or if there's a question about qualifications, we can go to the qualifications paragraph and figure out what's required there. So that was kind of explains those new 4.1.3 additions, B, C, D, and E. 5.5.4. Some of you that have been on the board for a while might have context for this particular word or book, but we are suggesting that we delete in a minute book that the secretary shall be responsible for keeping in a suitable minute book accurate minutes. We don't have a minute book, so we're not keeping minutes in a minute book. We save them in electronic format and we put them on the OSBA website. And so we are complying with the retention laws for those minutes, but we're not doing so in a minute book. And I checked with legal counsel and we are not required by law to have a minute book. So we are suggesting we remove that and not create a minute book. And I believe there's another reference to minute book coming up that we'll talk about. Section 6. This is just to add, and after I sent this out, I noticed that we have gender and gender identity. I think we could delete gender from this list and just have gender identity there. But the statute pertaining to places of public accommodation, like the OSBA, have to comply with this law, which I've cited to at the end of the memo. Like I said, I cut and pasted that law there so that you can see it. But recently, I think it was in 2021, gender identity was added to the list of protected classes that you cannot discriminate against based on gender identity. So that was added to Oregon law So that's why I'm suggesting it be added here. Sex was not in our bylaws, but that has been part of Oregon law for some time, so I suggested adding that as well. So that's just to bring that provision in compliance with current Oregon law. 7.1.6, there's another reference to minute book, so we propose changing that and putting in language to reference what we're actually doing to maintain those meeting minutes. And then I think that was the end of the suggestions that we made. So I'm happy, maybe we stop sharing. We might have to pull it back up depending on the questions, because I know that it can be pretty technical. So we might want to look at the language if there are specific questions.
Thank you, Haley. And Lori Denzuk has excused. She had to leave for another obligation. The way I would love to suggest streamlining the conversation is raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll go one person at a time for a question or feedback. We'll start with you saying, for example, I'll start modeling this, 3.9 and 3.10. And then we'll start if I have questions, I'll say my question. And then if I have comments, I'll say the comments, and we'll see if there's any other board member who wants to speak to that specific one. And then we'll go to the next item, if that makes sense. So raise your hand if you have any points that you want to discuss or ask questions about, and state what's the point that you have. And if nobody's ready, I have one. I just found out while we're going through this. So 3.9, 3.10. Regular meeting. My understanding, Haley, is that the intention of it is just to classify them and put a header for it. So we just define regular meeting as the annual one that we do at annual convention in November, and the special meeting is the ones that we do all over the year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I have concern about unintended consequence to that there is some mentions of regular meetings that may limit the scope of what we need to do. So what I want to reference as two examples I looked up quickly is 4.5. We say in 4.5 currently, administration, was it 4.5? Regular meetings. There is a mention of I think there was a mention for the caucuses to provide updates in 4.5 shall provide updates to the full board at regular meetings. So in that case, now the caucuses are gonna be only providing required to provide one annual rather than every special meeting. And also 4.1.1, the executive committee may make decisions between board meetings and and shall tell the full board about the decisions made at the next regular meeting. In the current interpretation, it's the next board meeting where we meet. But in this interpretation, I believe that will let the executive committee makes decisions, and they're not obligated to report until the November meeting. Is that correct? And Emily, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. For the regular meeting under 3.19, it's the annual meeting of the Board of Directors, and then any regularly scheduled board meetings. So that would be those quarterly board meetings. We set the meeting schedule for the year. And so those, I believe, are what you're referring to. So it does differentiate between regularly scheduled meetings, which is the annual meeting, which is the minimum requirement, is my understanding. And then the regularly scheduled board meetings would also be qualified under a regular meeting. The special meetings are the meetings that are called outside of those regularly scheduled quarterly board meetings.
Thank you. I misread it. Thank you for the clarification. That makes sense now. So the regular meetings are the ones that have been previously scheduled. All of them. Awesome.
Correct. On our calendar is how you could think about it.
Yes. Perfect.
Calendar movement.
Awesome. Thanks. Sorry about that. Any other questions or comments?
So, so we're gonna have some discussion with the whole board on all these changes, right? Because I know there have been a couple of issues coming up about discussions on certain topics in the bylaws. So what's next? That she just went over this with us. Are we voted on these changes today? Are we going before the board?
Now, the first step right now is if you have any questions, and then if you have any feedback, or if we need to have further deliberation, we'll meet again and we'll review those. We're not voting on anything today. We'll
Okay.
incorporate the feedback. This committee, on behalf of the board, will do the hard work of deliberating and recommending a recommendation for the committee, and the intention for the full board. And the intention is when the committee provides a recommendation, the board will deliberate for sure on that, but with the support of this committee, that we did deliberation and we did vet everything here. So this is the opportunity for us to ask questions, to highlight anything that we want to highlight, and then decide how we want to move forward in a future meeting. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Thank
I
you, Lynn.
think so.
Thank you, Linda. And actually, one thing I want to highlight as well, as members of the committee, absolutely feel free to receive feedback from board members. Let them submit it to me, or they can share it with you. And then in a future meeting, you can move those questions and feedback forward. So hopefully, we are very well informed of what works best for the institution. So as a member of the committee, it is your prerogative to move forward any ideas of your own or any feedback you're hearing. Neelam, and then Jackie, then Greg. Neelam.
Yeah, thank you so much for walking us through all these changes and for your work on this. I'm curious about the ex officio members. I didn't really appreciate until I read this document how many ex officio members we have. Are all the positions filled? I'm curious whether or not they are, because I'm familiar just with a few ex officio board members. I didn't, realize again, there were all these positions. And then, my other comment is I would be in favor of having a discussion about that
Thank you.
as the governance committee.
Thank you, Neelam. So not all the positions are filled, and some of the positions that are filled are not regularly attended or attended at all. And also some positions are triggered by a certain situation. So for example, we did not have for about 10 years, National School Board Association, board member from Oregon, Corvallis School, Oregon local board member, elected, to the National School Board Association until I served, and then that was triggered and I became one. So some of them are triggered by the virtue of someone elected to another organization. And to the second question, to the comments that you have noted, and we will have a further discussion in a later meeting. And also maybe perhaps some analysis of practices across other state associations as well, if that's something that the rest of the committee would like to do.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Jackie.
Maybe a little controversial. Zoom protocol. I am concerned that when we and I have the same issue on my board, that we have visitors and we never see their faces, that they're not, we have a policy on our board that the board members need to be shown on Zoom, but nobody else. And I know that sometimes we have to go on and off, but I think we need to have a conversation at another time. But I just want to put it out there that I think Zoom protocol and not knowing, really understanding who is attending our meetings because they're on Zoom so much, that for me, it's a concern. And it's a concern also on my own board. So
thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Being a double agent of this committee and the policy committee, I ask for your indulgence if I can bring that forward to the policy committee, since it is when I believe it is within the scope of one of the policies of the policy committee. And we'll bring that up for the policy committee to consider under the policies that they're considering as priorities. Is that something you agree to? So since it's not bylaws, it might be a policy.
Yes, and the other thing is that we have in this governance is eligibility. And is that going to go to the policy committee first, or can we have a conversation? That's another conversation we need to have. So does
Eligibility.
can we do that with our governance, or does it have to wait for policy?
Remind me, we're talking about eligibility of what exactly?
As it doesn't state, but I believe it has who can be an officer.
Oh, that would be a bylaws. That would be within this governance committee. So you would like to, let me go to the points. So your recommendation is, can we, as this committee, open discussion around the eligibility of officers and who can become an officer? Which is, I remembered that bylaw a lot because I've referred to it a lot. Haley, can you help me out? Which one is it? Officers.
3.5.4 talks about ex officios.
No, there is another one that talks about officers, and I believe that's the one that
5.3. I mean, it's a new that it's 5.3 is the new one, but I'm not sure I see anything. The only thing on officers is the what positions we have. So
No,
I don't believe that ever talks about
yes.
eligibility.
Actually, if you don't mind, Linnell, could you share screen and let's go to 5.1. I believe that's the one that's relevant to the conversation. And I just want to put it up here so for us to see it. And definitely we'll note if I believe that's the one for the eligibility that we can discuss and we can have a discussion around points to it. And my recommendation, we come back with some again best practices, different arguments for and against, and then we can discuss it here again. So 5.1 here reads, the board shall elect officers by majority vote prior to the November member meeting. I would remind the board, the committee members, I believe all of us are board members. We do have confidential documents that our legal counsel rendered that speaks to this point, and we may enter as a committee to executive session to review that in a future meeting, just to discuss 5.1 and understand the current practice, the past practice, and how it relates, and also if we want to change it, how we can change it. So just want to highlight there is a legal record that we may review if you want to. But just want to highlight that's in front of you. It says officers. It does not say who. And definitely if Jackie, it is the will of the committee to do that, we can schedule in a future meeting a discussion around 5.1 with a reminder of some conversations we had in the past. Emily.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I actually think that we do have to schedule that. Remembering back to the September board meeting that was taken out and referred back to the governance committee. And this is the first time the governance committee is convening. So I do think that has been a direction of the board that we need to schedule that. But I would recommend that being in a separate meeting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with that, probably we'll have some summary about the notes that were made on September and allow us to examine any records related to it from legal counsel and have more feedback. So it's going to be a thorough conversation, and we'll do that, Jackie. Thank you. So next up, I'm not sure Linda or Greg went first. Linda, if you're okay with it, can I go with Greg?
Sure, go with Greg first, please.
Sounds good. Greg.
Okay, just for clarification, when we get back together as a board, we will look over all these recommendations and we will authorize the final draft only. We will not vote on these as adopted. That will go out to the entire membership, which at the annual, it will be referred to the entire membership, which will vote on these changes of the bylaws. The board can't change all the bylaws, only the membership can change all of that. So it will go out to all of them and all of us, and we will vote on it together for those changes.
Correct. So at a certain date that we have a limit on as a board, we will vote as a board on a recommendation from this committee of bylaws, and whatever that recommendation is to yet to be determined after we continue to meet, deliberate, reach consensus, or reach realization that we don't have consensus, vote on the final version of that, submit it to the board. The board submits it to the general membership. Thank you, Greg, for clarifying the process. Emily?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that has to happen by September in order for us to move forward with having it on the ballot for our elections.
Yes. And to that point, actually, if the committee wants me, allows me to share, one thing I want us to think about is, just like how in your local communities, if you have other taxing districts, you communicate and connect with other taxing districts before you go on the ballots and ask for a bond, right? Similarly, I want us to think as a governance committee and as a board, what decisions we want to go for the membership on in September. So tentatively, if we end up with membership dues, bylaws changes, or any specific changes, we need to really think about the big picture, where we are at in September as a board, as a membership, and also what's else is there that we want to ask the membership for, whether it is membership dues changes or anything else. So I just want us to put that at the back of our mind. We need to do the work. We need to do what prioritize what we need to do, and also strategize in terms of what should take priority in terms of what we're asking the members to do, if that makes sense. So just thoughts for us to consider throughout the year. Linda?
I'm sorry about that. Okay. Two things. Back to the Zoom. Jim Green at one of our Saturday morning meetings between 8 to 12 during COVID, highlighted Zoom expectations. You had to have your screen on, and he just shared, well, your board member, we need to see who we're talking to and all of that. But he shared that. So it was clear if you were on the board and you were on the meeting to have your screen on. And I specifically asked, okay, well, what about if we're eating? I mean, I think sometime when you're eating, because we was having some meetings 5 in the evening or whatnot, is it okay for to be eating while you attending the meeting or what? And he said it was okay. But and what Jackie is asking, that is very, and most board member meetings do require you to have your, especially in official board meetings, to have that your Zoom picture on. So that's one. And the second is, again, unfinished business in December. From September last year, we talked about this whole ex officio 3.54. So it should have been on our first meeting today to talk about that, because it was shared in our retreat in September at the Hood River to put that on the governance agenda. So I would like something to say that when the agenda is not finished, and that when we refer to stuff, that unfinished business do come up on to be carried through. Because what I'm experiencing is that it's not. It's being delayed, and I almost feel like it's in hope that we just forget about it.
No, thank you. Thank you, Linda, for that. And if you don't mind, I would love to connect with you afterwards. In January, we adopted a process to really give the board members full access to setting the agenda process by starting the process by suggesting agenda items to the executive committee. The executive committee to set the agenda and to provide really prioritization based on the business. So if there is any agenda items, Linda, as a matter of a priority for you that you believe we did not address, please bring it to me. There are some board members who suggested new agenda items, and I'm submitting them accordingly to the executive committee. So definitely, I want to be transparent I would love to connect with you one-on-one and maybe take from you any notes about action items we need to make or discussions that we need to have. And I'll submit it forward to make sure they are prioritized according to the business needs, if that makes sense.
Yes, that do make sense, but I think what I'm saying is it's not just my prerogative for it to be on the agenda, it's discussed, it's unfinished business, I guess. It was like if it was being referred, it's unfinished business, so it goes over. But I understand what you're saying, so yes, I will love to have that conversation on unfinished business. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, please write them down and maybe let's have a conversation sometime soon. To the first point, I want to acknowledge two things. I can't see the documents. I remember seeing the documents during Zoom as COVID days. There was a guideline for us on use of Zoom. Uh, if it is not an objection of this committee as the presiding officer, I want to just set the tone for this meeting. I think that using the screen is something to be discussed in the future for the full board. For us right now, I want to acknowledge a few things. I received directly from board members who have some concerns around access, whether they need privacy if they have a child or some accommodation needs, or frankly, some technical needs where using your video may end up impacting the bandwidth. Personally, if I'm presiding, I gotta be on the screen all the time. But my mental load is much lower if I can focus without having that consciousness of someone seeing me all the time. So for very different reasons, I want to ask this committee to give each other grace, whether it is for technical or accommodation, accessibility, disability accommodation, or privacy of household that committee members may opt to not have the screen on for various reasons, and we want to give each other a grace with that. Is there any objection that we do that until we reach consensus on how to move forward with the etiquettes on Zoom? Yeah, seen with that, please feel free to take care of yourself and participate to the fullest extent the way that you can. All right, with that, Emily and then Linda. Emily?
Thank you, Mr. President. Jackie, I actually have a clarifying question on that for you, just for us, for in terms of the bylaws. Are you referring to visitors to our meetings and wanting them to identify themselves and turn on their camera? Is that what you were talking about, or were you talking about directors participating in the meeting? Because those are two different things, and I would want legal counsel on that if we can require. I don't believe at a public meeting we can require that, but I just wanted some clarity there for us.
Well, both. Well, and we'll see what I'm interested in, what the legal things are, but I honestly have a problem with the visitors, and we don't really know who they are. We never see them. We just see a name, and as a board member, I'd kind of like to know who's in the room.
Thank you, Jackie. Maybe can I defer to Haley and Bob if needed for any inputs on telephonic participation and board ability to limit it? Haley.
So the board could certainly ask attendees to identify themselves, but if the attendee from the public does not want to turn on their camera, that's not something you can require. So you can do the ask, but if they refuse, you can't kick them out of the meeting because they're refusing to turn their camera on. So, but certainly sometimes just asking, people will comply by just asking.
Thank you. Neelam.
I know for the caucus meetings, sometimes we've had bots, what seem like bots join, and we've kicked. That's the only instance in which we removed someone. We've asked, can you verify who you are? We haven't heard anything, and just out of not being able to verify that it's a person, we have removed someone or a presence, not.
Thanks, Neelam. back to the business of the day. Any feedback, questions, or comments on the bylaws, changes, recommendations? So to summarize, Haley, are you able to maybe summarize feedback you got and where we're at?
It sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have consensus that we need to schedule another meeting to talk about ex officios in more detail.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, and then discussion about the Zoom etiquette, which I think will be referred to the policy committee. Those are the two things that I've taken away from this conversation.
And I would add distinctly, while there's overlap, officers. Eligible.
Officers, yes.
Perfect. Committee members, is that a good summary of where we're at? Does that mean we're 20 minutes ahead of schedule? All right, I'll give it 30 seconds if anybody has last thoughts about the bylaws. If not, the next item on the agenda is going to be adjourning. Oh, no, but yes, that's it. Bylaws review. Anything on the matter of bylaws review? So we will be meeting sometime within this year, as soon as we have information. And staff, I would like to work collaboratively with you to provide as much information for the committee around ex officios and bylaw and officers. In my role with NSBA, there's really wealth of diversity of options that other states associations have adopted on both matters. So would love to also collaborate in sharing that feedback for the committee to consider, like, this is what Utah is doing and whether it works for that for us or not. Maybe that will be helpful for the discussion as well. And Linda, I see your hand up.
Yes, I just want to, due to the meetings and how things went last year, can we keep these meetings going with I mean, here it is September, March, and we're just not having a meeting that was something put on the agenda for us to discuss in September. So how often would you think we might have these meetings? Because I'm hearing there's no next meeting to discuss this ex officio. There's nothing scheduled. It's just there.
Yes, thank you, Linda, for that question. If it is acceptable for the board, we'll work on the two items that you have raised for further discussion, making sure staff are ready to facilitate the discussion and provide you with all relevant information. Once that information is ready, we'll reach out to the committee members with a doodle or a survey of availability. And based on it, we'll work towards scheduling a meeting as soon as possible. Definitely, as you may be aware, it's been hard to schedule a meeting since September. But meeting in March, frankly, in my perspective, is pretty good. That's we already met as a policy committee. We already met as bylaws committee. I really look forward for us to continue working. You have my personal commitment and absolutely staff commitment. They're working very hard to make sure we're ready for the September meeting, and we're planned backward from there. That's a September board meeting. This committee will aim to have a vote to recommend an action one way or the other on the bylaws. Emily?
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just wondering if when we send out that doodle, if it would be helpful if we just maybe scheduled one in April, May, and June. And just so that we have a timeline that we're working towards and it's on the calendar, so we're not having to come back out for multiple doodles and folks have it. If that works for everyone. And if we don't need three, then we don't need three, but then it's at least on our calendars and it gives Haley and I and Bob a deadline to work towards.
Any objections
you.
to long-term or multiple? So make sure you put all of your availabilities. So in case we need 3 meetings, we can. Linda, is that to your satisfaction in terms of
Yes, we're having meetings for other things. I'm emotionally distraught right now, but yes, this is important business. I'm sure other things important, but a 5-hour orientation and all these other meetings, this is help puts the fire out of some things and keep us moving forward. But the lesser meetings, the better. But I don't think it'll take 3. I think you can do it in 1.
hopefully
Thank
we
you.
will. Thank you, Linda, and please take care of yourself.
Thank
With
you.
that, there's no further business to the board. Is there any objection to adjourn? Seeing there's no further business to the board and no objections to adjourning, the committee is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a good weekend. Bye.
Thank you.